Months ago, when I was putting together clips for my big fatherhood video, I had to rewatch a lot of cutscenes from Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm talking a lot. And upon doing so and wasting hours of my life, I found a cutscene in Chapter 6 that really stood out to me. Or rather, a certain aspect of this cutscene that really stood out to me.
Dutch. Think. Dutch. Be practical now.
Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this was initially supposed to be a little TikTok video. Inspiration struck and I just started rambling at my phone, but as I stood there and stared at myself in the reflection and watched the timer count up to 8 minutes, I thought to myself, why don't I just cave in and accept the fact that I cannot shut up and just make this a more formal video. So, here we are. I know I am not the first poor soul to try and attempt and piece together just how Dutch van der Linde's brain works. I do fear that is quite the impossible task. For a man who is like that, and also fictional on top of it, I find it easier, and far less daunting of a task, to look at certain aspects of his thinking rather than his mind as a whole. Dutch's brain and his thinking and the decisions he makes are certainly one of the more intriguing parts of his character, and I think that's why this scene really stood out to me. Two opposing forces in Dutch's life are demanding two very different things of him, of his mind specifically, and it really highlights the difference in his ability to think and his ability to be practical, and how that sort of changes over the course of the game. To get a better understanding of why this battle between thinking and practicality is such a substantial thing in the final chapter, first we have to go back a little bit and take a look at how Dutch operated both before the story and at its very beginning. Throughout the beginning of Red Dead Redemption 2's story, we see pretty consistently how a lot of members of the gang pride Dutch on his ability to think and plan. And given how often we see this, and how steadfast that belief is with multiple people, I think it's fair to assume that there is months, maybe even years of support backing that belief. That kind of trust is not just born overnight. Being a good planner is clearly meant to be an aspect of Dutch's character, or at the very least, something these people believe to be true. Given that we see long-standing members of the game, namely Arthur and Hosea, hold a lot of faith in Dutch's ability to think up schemes and plan a way forward, that tells me that this must be something that he's proven to be true over and over. Enough to sort of justify his reputation at the very least. Especially after something as disastrous as the Blackwater ferry robbery, for the gang to still hold faith in him and blindly follow him after something as hellish as that, there must be something there that holds their trust. Now, I don't want to ignore the reality that these people didn't have much choice but to believe in Dutch. That is a fair argument, but I am also convinced that these people genuinely believe Dutch could figure his way out of anything. And when he's able to figure out a plan to lead them out of the blizzard-ridden grizzlies and into the open plains of the Heartlands, why wouldn't they believe that? Yet again, he has thought up a plan that has kept them safe and out of trouble.
Get out here!
There are a few conversations between our characters that insinuates that a lot of their blind faith and complete trust in Dutch comes from the fact that they believe he had saved them in one way or another.
Look, I make no bones about it. Dutch, he saved my life.
For a lot of these people, being thought about and being considered, that was more than they were ever offered from anybody else.
I just think, and I've been thinking about this a lot, I just think Dutch loves us. And being loved, well, we're gonna be okay.
It's no wonder that they might perceive him as somebody who's thoughtful, or that being able to move and stay together is the result of good planning. Couple all this with the fact that Dutch likes to walk around just spouting his philosophy and these morals he supposedly lives by.
I'm going forward, because going forward makes me an angel of God and not no monkey.
Yeah, this guy is practically the thinker to these people. But as the game continues and as things sort of start to fall apart, we do see the support kind of waver in some people. And questions arise about Dutch's ability to actually come up with and see through all of these foolproof plans. The Pinkertons keep catching up with them. People keep getting hurt. There's not a lot of money to go around anymore. Things just aren't working out the way that they used to. And while there's certainly multiple factors factors at play here, I would say the biggest factor in why Dutch's decision-making becomes so flawed is because Dutch feels as though he does not have any time.
You just need some time. I need some time. I just need somebody to buy me some goddamn time, one of you.
As all of these problems arise, the gang is backed into corners and chased. Distrust is starting to form. Dutch is pressured into making decisions very quickly with no time to think about them. Sometimes he's forced into making decisions he doesn't even want to make. And we see how these hasty decisions typically end with an even more unfavorable outcome, which only repeats the cycle of having to make even more hasty decisions, sometimes with even less time to consider the consequences. In the latter chapters of the game, we literally see Dutch beg for more time.
I ain't got a final plan yet. Watch there, I ain't got it. I just need time.
When things start to close in around him, all he wants is the space and time to think, to plan. The big joke about Dutch and his plans doesn't come from nothing. Like we discussed, his ability to think and plan and come up with all these ideas was something he and the people around him prided him on. But this really hurried and chaotic nature of the second half of the game really highlights a big flaw in Dutch's thinking, that being that he can't really do it when he's in these high-stress, split-second decision scenarios. Now, to his credit, the situation that the gang finds themselves in this game, it is unlike anything they have experienced before. They have never been chased and hunted down like they are now. Perhaps he's never had to make such drastic decisions this fast before, or at the very least, maybe not for such a large group of people. Look, I'm trying to give Dutch a little bit of credit, okay? And I do not do that very often, and I don't do it lightly. I do not doubt that this is just beyond stressful. I don't doubt that this is a beyond stressful position to be in. I'm not trying to say that Dutch should have been able to make the perfect decision every time. That is asking far too much of literally anybody, and I'm not faulting him for it necessarily. But all that being said, it doesn't change the fact that these decisions he's making do have negative impacts in the end. Whether it's his intention or not, things still tend to go pretty badly. And as time goes on, we see how these split-second decisions he makes become increasingly more violent and more selfish as time goes on. There's less consideration for keeping the gang safe as a unit, and less concern about possible collateral damage. It seems as though Dutch is more concerned with self-preservation than the safety of his gang. And I believe for this to be, in part, due to Micah's influence. Micah is an agent of chaos, to put it metaphorically. To put it literally, he is a nasty man whose only motivation seems to be money and his own entertainment. We learn very quickly that Micah is clearly an outcast in this group. He does not get along with anyone, he instigates a lot of arguments, and he seems to hold the most contempt for the protagonists that we play as. You are not meant to like this man, and the game is not subtle about that. And while I would not place sole blame on Micah for the downfall of the gang, or even Dutch's decline, he does bear some responsibility as a driving force. I don't have to tell you that. He most certainly sped things up by knowing the weaknesses in the gang, by knowing Dutch's weaknesses in particular. He knew what to exploit, he knew where to push, he knew when to back off, and he knew when to give praise. That man read Dutch like a book, which is why I believe that he knew how to get Dutch to act more selfishly, how to worry more about his own self-preservation, and that was by urging him to stop thinking.
You'll figure it out, boss. You always do.
There's a few ways in which Micah achieves this. By inciting panic and by planting ideas. You could argue that those are kind of one and the same, but just walk with me here. In some cases, Micah creates this sense of hurry, of limited time. He reminds Dutch of the situation they're in and how something needs to be done. It puts pressure on Dutch to make these hasty decisions just so he can have an answer for Micah's insistence. It makes him feel as if he doesn't have time to think and consider every single variable. I pointed out how a lot of the hasty decisions we see Dutch make in the latter half of the game become more about his own self-preservation, and I think that is exactly what Micah wanted. He doesn't want Dutch to think. The more Dutch thinks, the more likely he is to consider everybody in the gang. The more likely he is to consider different outcomes. The more likely he is to take the path of least resistance that might have the least amount of casualties, the least amount of collateral damage, something that has the least amount of conflict and the most success for everybody. Micah never cared about the gang, and he is very open about that. He has never been subtle about his hesitances with a group of their size. He didn't want the burden of a group of people that actually cared about each other and wanted to protect each other. Pushing Dutch towards his base instincts of self-preservation by creating this sense of urgency allows him to take advantage of the situation and reap a lot lot of benefit for himself. Another thing we see Micah do is plant ideas in Dutch's head. Admittedly, it is not always successful.
Way I see it, best thing we can do is let the week go. Move on, get our money, start over.
That ain't happening.
But this highlights another flaw in Dutch's supposedly genius way of thinking. For a man who is prided on his morals and preaches about his philosophies, he sure does hear out a lot of suggestion from Micah towards the end. Now, if you'll excuse me to rag on Dutch for a moment because I already gave him too much leeway, I think this goes to show how much of a charlatan Dutch is, and how a lot of his morality and the ideals that he sort of prides himself on are completely performative. But my dislike for Dutch aside, I do think it's important to point out how much we see Micah take advantage of this weakness. This man knows that by complimenting Dutch and by blowing smoke up his ass in the start, he is much more susceptible to listen to suggestion later. As things start to fall apart and Dutch has to make those split-second decisions, he turns to self-preservation and violence because he doesn't have the time to think and figure things out. But if someone does the thinking for him, if someone else can suggest all these plans and ideas, it takes that weight off of his own shoulders. And, to Micah's benefit, makes some of those selfish decisions a lot easier. All this is to say, Micah is only egging on the panic and uncertainty that we see build up over the course of the game, playing into Dutch's self-preservation that seems to sort of take precedence over his careful planning and consideration, hoping that Dutch will prioritize what's practical, that is, what benefits him most, by disregarding the lives of others and only worrying about money. Survival is more practical than dreams and ideals and planning. So when we find our characters in this confrontation in the final chapter of the game, we find a few different kinds of symbolism at play here. With Micah and Arthur at opposing sides, not only do we see a metaphorical depiction of the long-standing original ideals of the gang against the more selfish and violent decline in recent memory, but it's also almost as if the two opposing sides of Dutch's mind are literally being pitted against each other. Arthur knows, or at least believes, that if Dutch just takes a moment to think, to just consider everyone around them and what all they have been through, that Dutch still has the capability to do the right thing. But Micah immediately cuts that line of thinking short, and he puts more pressure onto Dutch by giving him another command and telling him to just be practical. Be practical and preserve yourself, and we will win. It's the two fundamental ideals that these characters have been trying to urge Dutch towards during the entire course of the game. But I also don't want to ignore that a few seconds before the big standoff, when Arthur is relaying that Micah had been speaking to the Pinkertons, Micah urges Dutch to think of the future.
You talked.
That's a goddamn lie.
Dutch.
Dutch, think of the future.
Urging him to think certainly goes against this big push to be practical, doesn't it? But this is where I think Micah highlights the flaw in Dutch's thinking. Even when he does take the time to consider what all they've been through in recent history, it's as if Dutch struggles to look at the entire picture. When Arthur urges Dutch to think, he's asking that Dutch consider everything. How Micah involved himself, when and where he was present when things went wrong, how conveniently the law happened to find them everywhere they went.
Because it seems to me that since you've been riding with us, there ain't been nothing but trouble.
It's really a desperate plea when we look at how Dutch's thinking changes over the course of the game. While he did at one time consider all of these people and all of their safety, now he's left thinking that these people hate him and how they might be rats simply because they have questions for his lines of thinking. He now values blind faith because anything less means treason, and his now narrow-minded line of thinking can only consider what will happen if everyone is on his side and blindly trusts in these haphazard plans with no question.
I need time and no traitors.
Which is exactly what Micah encourages when he asks Dutch to think of the future. He's asking Dutch to completely disregard all of the relationships and bonds and this trust that the gang once had with each other, and only consider what's best moving forward, regardless of the past. He wants him to look forward with this sort of tunnel vision and only think about what will keep them alive and hopefully rich. He's not genuinely asking that Dutch come up with some big scheme and relay this fantasy about moving to a tropical island to escape the law.
Tahiti! Fiji! Australia!
And that's where I think Micah fails to understand something very crucial about Dutch. Dutch is incapable of being practical. I know, I just went on this big long tirade about how Micah has encouraged him to be nothing but practical. And there are plenty of times when Dutch does prioritize his own self-preservation and makes what he might feel to be the most practical decision in the moment. But over the course of the game, as Micah urges Dutch towards practicality, he just fails to simply understand that that's not how Dutch's mind operates. Dutch operates on a level that some might call idealist, but I would call delusional. He comes up with these schemes and plans that are so far removed from reality, and for whatever reason, he always believes himself capable of pulling them off. Call it narcissism, call it a big ego, call it idealism, call it delusion, call it what you want. Point is, Dutch is a dreamer. He walks around spouting his philosophies and morals, claiming to be some kind of freedom fighter for the betterment of America. It should be evident from the start that this man does not consider what is most realistic and practical. Shit, if he were practical, he never would have robbed the ferry back in Blackwater. He would have let Arthur and Hosea carry out whatever plan they had that was clearly much more thought out and much more safe. We are told from the start that Dutch is an idealist first and a planner second.
Dutch being Dutch, he is busy making plans, and Dutch being Dutch, those plans involve robbery and dreams.
So what does that mean? That the whole standoff between practicality and thinking is pointless? Kind of? Of course, we could take this literally and say that arguing for Dutch's support was pointless because, in the end, Dutch leaves both of them to die. I'm not going to recount the entire ending of the game, I'm sure y'all know it. But what I will say is, I think showing the standoff between Arthur and Micah and what they specifically ask of Dutch goes to show what they misunderstand about Dutch and his brain. They don't quite get that what they're asking him to do is essentially pointless. He's not a practical man, and especially at this point, he refuses to think about the big picture at play here. I think it's pretty substantial for these characters, and for us, to realize that they never really understood Dutch. Practicality and dreams have fought for dominance in his brain for who knows how long, and these two were never going to change that. Or maybe it's not that deep at all. I think it means that I just read far too much into details that perhaps aren't that deep. No, seriously, I would love to know if anybody else sort of got this interpretation from it, or if I just yapped a giant nothing burger for however long it's been, an hour. I do pride myself on being quite good of making something out of nothing. For real though, I would love to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I've really appreciated the discussion my last few videos have brought, so definitely keep at it. Don't really have anything fun or funky to say at the end of this one, so we'll keep it simple. Stay safe, take care of yourself, and I will see you when I see you next. Bye bye!